While it's always open season on teenagers, the worst thing that ever happens to actual kids in mainstream horror films is that someone or something really weird wants to play with them. They're the chosen one, or sometimes they're even the aggressor, but they're never the victim, especially on screen. Until now. Yes, welcome to my spoiler review of It, where here it is, the answer to the question so many of you have asked me, and that's yes, you actually see poor adorable little Georgie crawling for his life away from the storm drain with his arm freshly bitten off, blood spewing into the rain-soaked street, quite artistically, I might add. But that's not all, and this is your last chance to bail out of the spoiler review. Still here? Okay, on top of that, the other gore-tastic scene with a kid was that you see a vision of little Betty Ripsom, and they set that up really well throughout the whole film, who's been ripped in half and is still alive, screaming for help. To social media? To complain about violence against children? No! And here's why. There are actually three reasons. The first is that both scenes happen so quickly and are more about the aftermath than the actual violent act itself, that by the time you get over your initial reaction of, is this actually what I'm looking at? It's over. I'd also say that they're very low on blood and gore, except for that artistic angle, but and maybe that was an intentional choice, because that's the second reason. They never glorify the violence, which I think is really important. There's a very fine line to walk here, and I think the non-glorification of it and the speed is key. And then here's the third reason why I think that it's the right choice for this movie, and that's that in real life, bad stuff happens to kids, and kids are often the easiest targets, or one of the easiest targets. So maybe there should be a movie that gives kids a heads up and says, if you're not careful, this could be you. And I'm really torn as to what age is appropriate to be able to see this movie. I mean, it's rated R, but again, I think that's more for disturbing imagery, and also the fact that this happens to kids, but it's not that gory, it's not that bloody. But I think, no matter who is able to see it in theaters, I think that this movie is going to absolutely kill on the sleepover market. Because what a perfect movie to watch with your own Losers Club, right? I mean, I think seeing it as a sleepover movie will be a rite of passage, which is perfect because this is a film about a rite of passage for the Losers Club. It just works out all so beautifully. So I see this movie, especially if they're able to stick the landing with the sequel, being something that, is a slow burn. It stands the test of time, which is an incredible achievement. Now, speaking of kids who are in the line of fire, who are in danger, perhaps my favorite thing about this movie is that you see kids realizing that the only one who's really going to save them is themselves, and that realization. And maybe that's kind of like becoming an adult. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to think about that more. But I thought that was fascinating to behold. I mean, sure, there's a big emphasis on the Losers Club, and we have to all stick together. But even that bond is portrayed from the viewpoint of the individual. And being a part of the Losers Club and how each child interacts with that group is something that each individual is a choice they have to make, and a choice they have to constantly reevaluate throughout the film. I thought that was really, really interesting. It's very much a film I think about. It's interesting because it's called the Losers Club is such a big part of it, but I do think it's a film about individuality and individual choices, and I guess as we'll see, who you become when you grow up, which is an individual choice. It's influenced by outside parties, but that famous saying, you're born alone and you die alone. I think that could apply very much to this movie. And the best example of that is my favorite line in the film, and that's when Richie has this long laundry list of why he's upset with Bill. He's like, "Oh, Bill, I'm so mad at you," and he ends it with, and they're trying to set it up because here's for those of you, obviously you're watching this, you've seen the movie, but just to reiterate, Pennywise says, here's the deal, kids. They have Pennywise on the ropes, and he's like, you can just leave me Bill as a nice little snack before I go into hibernation, or I'll kill you all. And Bill, I think quite to Bill's credit, again, an individual choosing to sacrifice himself says, I put you all in danger, just go, get out of here. Actually in some ways, let me be put out of my misery because I miss Georgie so much. And you think that's what Richie's going to do. You think he's making a long list of why it's okay for them to leave Bill. But then he ends it And Finn Wolfhard doesn't telegraph this twist, which is why it's so great. And he says, and now I hate you because I'm going to have to kill this fucking clown. And the whole audience just erupted with like applause and cheers and laughter. It was just a perfect moment. And it's like, it's not so much, again, about the group, but it's this moment where Richie is like, you know, you've put me as an individual in a really difficult position, but I've decided that I'm not going to be the type of person who abandons my friend. I just can't be that person. And again, it's Richie. I can't be that. It's not so much about what's going to happen to Bill, but Richie making a choice about who he is. And I loved it so much. It was fascinating. And I also thought, speaking of kids versus adults, it was a really interesting choice that the adults in the film are portrayed as grotesque. And you have to wonder if that's like the curse of dairy, right? Rotting these adults the longer they stay there. Or if it's just how these kids in this story see adults. Like, as you get older, you get that much closer to death, and these adults are literally rotting. It's an interesting choice, and it'll be interesting to see what they go with for the sequel when the kids are then adults. Like, will they no longer see adults that way because now they're part of the group, or have they applied that really negative view of adulthood to themselves? Maybe it'll be a mix. Maybe some of the Losers Club will thrive as adults, and maybe some of them will have that negative mentality of growing older just haunt them. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out, but it was a great choice. It was a very interesting choice. Now, let's go through the losers in the order of which they appealed to me. So number 1 is Sophia Lillis as Beverly Marsh. Maybe because she was the girl of the group, but I just really related to her. I liked that there seemed to be so much going on inside of her head and her heart. There was just like, she was just a hurricane of emotion and also sexual awakening. I think her exploration of her sexuality was incredibly well done. Talk about another tightrope to walk, right? Violence against kids, sexuality in kids. And this movie did them, walked across both those ropes beautifully. But here, there was a lot of different elements going on with Beverly Marsh. There were the rumors at school about how she'd slept with everyone. And I thought it was interesting how she chose to deal with that. She just kind of let it ride because she knew it was pointless to try and change everyone's mind about her. Also her discovering the power of flirtation. That scene with the chemist, the pharmacist, that was really fantastic. And I also thought that was great juxtaposed with her father's predatory nature towards her. Like, Beverly was growing up a little bit too fast because of what was going on at home with her father, which I also thought was really interesting to see. That both the negative and the positive of a child, starting to become aware of sexuality. And then, contrasted with all of that, is the sweetness of realizing that she has a secret admirer. Like, all the more crass elements about sexuality were just Beverly playing around, exploring, testing. But the idea that her love for Bill could actually mean something, and seeing how that affected her behavior was beautiful, and something that's really, I think, only shown so far in books. To see it in a mainstream film was really, really amazing. And the love triangle was so well done. That was another element of the movie that they just did perfectly. And again, to Beverly's credit, showing what a nice person she is deep down. The whole Losers Club, they were all really, really nice. Really just nice people, which I think helped really pull you in more to the story. But the way she handled being in that situation, torn between Bill and Ben, was real. And I thought it was a good example of how to handle yourself in that situation, actually. Like, I thought it was great. When Bill and Ben were waiting at the end, they were waiting each other out for who could be left with some alone time with Beverly, the whole audience just laughed at that because, again, it was just so real. And so much of what happens with crushes and boy-girl interaction and even man-woman interaction is nonverbal, yet still speaks volumes. And this movie did that. Like the watering hole scene. Again, perfect example of, how that nonverbal communication, but it's just so potent. And it took me a while for Bill to grow on me, actually, because he's so in his own head for most of the movie. But when he finally decides to do something about missing Georgie, and also at the end when he finally forces himself to accept Georgie's death, and just as he emerges from his cocoon, we get to see him. And he really is like a special individual. He is a leader. And my favorite line from him was when he was making that speech about the house on Neibolt Street, and that it was easier for him to go inside that rotted, haunted house than to go into his own home, where he was just constantly reminded of Georgie's death. That was amazing. As I said in my non-spoiler review, this is the speech that pulled everything into focus. The stakes, why they had to do it, what was going on with Bill. It was perfect. It just really, he was trying to shake the losers into action, and I think it really shakes the audience into like pinpoint focus as well. Then next, Finn Wolfhard is Richie Tozer. He was just really funny. He was really funny. And in many ways, he was almost like the audience, reacting and commenting on what was happening with everyone else. I loved it when he said, like, he was the only one, they made that interesting choice that he didn't see Pennywise until they were doing with the slides. And then it was great when he was like, what the F is that? But I thought it was funny when he said, oh, you have to be a virgin to see this clown or what? It was great. It was like little things like that I thought made the group of kids seem more real and was just made Richie really endearing. And a lot of that was not only the lines, but also Finn Wolfhard's delivery. Really good stuff. But also I thought that Jack Dylan Grazer as Eddie Kaspbrak was also really funny. I thought he was really funny. And I think that he really, I guess maybe one of the reasons his jokes were so funny to me was that I'm a germaphobe too. So I was like, I'm right there with you, Eddie. We should stay out of that water. And I have to say, I think he's going to love it when Purell is invented. They can have a lot of fun with that character, with moving the time frame up. Instead of the 50s to the 80s, like in the book, they're doing the 80s, of course, to current times. And that'll be a lot of fun with Eddie in particular. But I loved him learning about his mother using placebos on him. And I thought it was great when he said, these are gazebos. That was such a great line. It was great because he's this child trying to deal with this sophisticated situation and word and what his mother's doing to him. But he still reminds you of what a child he is because he doesn't know the word. It's great. But, in the 80s, actually, I think it came out early 90s. It's available on iTunes. That's where I recently saw it. But in that miniseries, he didn't find out about that until he was an adult. So to have that happen now, I wonder how that's going to shape him when we do see him 27 years later. It's really fascinating. And also, think about it. I mean, he made a big deal about having to give his mom a kiss goodbye in front of his friends. Loved it when Richie was like, you want a kiss from me too? So funny. But when he was at the door and he turned around and he so sweetly said, bye, Mommy, you could tell that he loved and trusted his mother, no matter how grotesque she looked to us, because again, that's how they were portraying the adults. And that was broken. That bond was broken. And again, fascinated to see what that does to him when he becomes an adult. Then next, I liked Wyatt Olaf as Stanley Uris, mostly because I know he's a ticking time bomb for the sequel. I don't want to give anything away if you haven't seen the sequel, but he's holding a lot back, and you'll find out. And I hope they do something with that in the sequel. Because, they didn't do too much with it in the miniseries. But I hope that plays out, because I think it's, again, fascinating that these kids are too young to realize that in the end, when Stanley says, I hate you to Bill, he might laugh it off, but he genuinely meant that. When someone turns to you and looks you in the eye and says they hate you, even if it's with a smile, or they say they were just kidding later, in some levels, they were not. So I thought that was really well done. Then Jeremy Ray Taylor is Ben Hanscom and Chosen Jacobs is Mike Hanlon, who I've put together for a reason, which you'll see in just a moment. But the first thing I want to say is that I was shocked that Henry Bowers literally carved an H into the flesh of Ben's stomach. Like he really carved it in there. And that's going to leave a mark. That H ain't going away. I mean, maybe if Ben pays for plastic surgery as an adult, but are you really going to invest that kind of money in your stomach? Especially when it'll be such a great visceral visual reminder in the sequel? I'm very curious about that. But that was to see that kind of violence again towards it was child on child, but still, it was shocking. And I can't believe, by the way, that with all the injuries in the movie, all of them quite serious, no one got an infection. Like when Eddie was like, we got to clean this up. I was like, Eddie's not kidding around. You really do have to clean that up. I mean, that would be far scarier than anything that Pennywise could come up with. But my real problem with Ben Hanscom, and I'm not quite sure why they did this, was that they gave the research angle to him. I mean, he had the New Kids on the Block jokes; those were golden. Again, it was so funny of Beverly to notice that poster on the back of the door, but it was so sweet of her just to keep it between her and Ben, like just to just poke him, playfully nudge him a little bit, tease him a little bit, but not to be cruel as to expose him to the rest of the group. So I guess they wanted to get them to Ben's room, but they could have figured out another way to do that, to take the research stuff away from Mike when it's like his defining character trait is just really unfortunate, especially when he's the only character of color. I get very angry when they take traits for female characters, the only female character, and give it to a male character. That was a problem with Watchmen and Silk Spectre. She would be in a scene and they would take her lines that she was still in, she was still in the scene, and they just give them to a male character. You're like, what? She's standing right there. Why can't she say her line? So to have Mike just standing right there while Ben tells everybody about the history of dairy was really, unfortunate, because it didn't leave it didn't leave Mike much. I mean, he had the whole railgun thing from the slaughterhouse where his uncle works, and that give and take, I could see where they were trying to go with that, but it didn't quite work. I think because we didn't get really to know Mike at all. But Kareem Abdul-Jabbar recently wrote an editorial piece for The Hollywood Reporter, and he was talking about superheroes of color and what was important about them. And he said Hollywood should be careful not to play up the stereotype that black people are only brawn and not brains. And this is a really perfect and unfortunate example of what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was talking about, to rob Mike of the chance to be the brains of the group. And instead, he's the guy with the weapon. Then, speaking of the person that, he got into a big fight with at the end with the weapon, Nicholas Hamilton is Henry Bowers. In the beginning, this character was just so psychotic that it seemed beyond reason to me. I had a really hard time connecting with it. Like when his friends were like, I think you're going too far, Henry. I was like, yeah, he's clearly going too far. Why are you hanging out with him? But then when his officer father showed up, and his father said the line about nothing makes, he shot at Henry's feet, and he said, nothing makes a paper man crumble like fear. I was like, ooh, that's amazing. That was just really well done. And I thought that the way that Henry killed his father and how easy Pennywise made it, literally the flick of a switch, was also excellent. But then they just had him fall down the well. I was like, isn't he supposed to stick around to be blamed for the deaths of all these kids and to be in the mental institution for the sequel? I mean, I don't know why you would just literally throw a character away like that, especially one who had been so I think strongly established, even if it was a little weird and it was a little too much. I mean, Henry Bowers made an impression. Why would you just do away with him? I don't know, maybe he survived that fall down, but I don't think so. He ricocheted. If he survived, he's going to be awfully broken up. Then as for Bill, I did like when Eddie broke his arm. That was really amazing as well. I liked it when he said, don't you touch me, when Richie tried to reset it. I again was like, I agree with Eddie, let a doctor do it. Then as for Bill Skarsgard as Pennywise, I really loved Tim Curry's portrayal of the character in the miniseries, because he was, to me, like a sex offender dressed as a clown, but who was totally not into the clown disguise. He was, he just put it on and was like kind of resented that he had to wear it, and he was like, let's just get to the bottom line here, kid. Right? So it took me a while to warm to Skarsgard, who obviously has an incredibly different take on it. He has to have a different take on it. You don't want to just be copying what Tim Curry did. There's the bunny teeth, there's the eyes that point in different directions as he loses his train of thought, and then also the drool, like just the drool. I mean, I think it becomes clear towards the end of this movie that Pennywise is just trying to survive as well. So I think when you look back at Pennywise's performance, it makes a little bit more sense. But for me, where it came together, and I was like, I get you, clown, I see you, was on the house on Neibolt Street, when he's downstairs with Eddie, and then he hears Bill and Richie talking about how it's not real. Just remember, it's not real. And then I liked that kind of like, it really kind of frustrated Pennywise, right? Like he's like, come on, like what more do I have to do for you kids? And he literally turned around and sarcastically and frustratingly said, not real enough for you? Right? Like you're criticizing my work? And I realized that he's a performance artist, and he's not a particularly good one. He's just taking stabs in the dark. And he's playing with his food, actually, also in a way. Fear makes the kids tastier, so his heart's not really into it. He doesn't have like a mission statement. He's just like, they taste better when I poke them, so I'm going to poke them, but I wish I didn't have to, right? Like that's kind of like what I was getting from Bill Skarsgard's Pennywise. So I guess that feeling of, bottom lineness was there from Tim Curry's performance, but again, they're very, very different. I almost feel like Pennywise was like this artist who knew he wasn't very good, so he really put his defense up and got angry if you would criticize him because he knew what you were saying was true. But again, his motivation was more about just surviving, and I hope they fill in more of the blanks with the sequel, because I think there's more there, and I think you have to fill in more to make this really stick. Like, they have me intrigued, but he's not a full character just yet. I also wasn't sure how I felt about the literalization of we all float down here with all those dead kids floating around Pennywise's headquarters. Because isn't he feeding? I mean, if these kids are food, isn't he just wasting food? Like, why didn't he eat them? I mean, in the miniseries, he's storing them for the winter, like cocooning them. But, that didn't seem to be the case here at all. They fell down, in fact, and he had no food stored for 27 years. So I don't know how that worked. Maybe he was waiting to cocoon those kids. I'm not sure. And I was surprised that they never spotted Georgie. I mean, they had the raincoat, but I'm surprised that I would be like, immediately as soon as they were like, hey, there's a bunch of kids' bodies up there, I'd be like, where's Georgie? At least he can get a good burial. I did like, though, when Pennywise tried to strike a deal. I thought that was good, and that's what made me feel like I could talk to Pennywise. And I hope we do get to talk to Pennywise, because clearly he's been orchestrating things for like a century or so, when Derry was first founded. So there's got to be a little bit more going on inside of him, so I want to find out what that is. Then here's the big question. Is the movie scary? I think that if you don't like It, this version of It, that's going to be your chief complaint. It's not scary enough. But I think it's more disturbing. And as I said in my non-spoiler review, it's more about forming a connection with the story and the characters. This movie is a vivid dream, a haunting moment, or an intense personal connection. And those things can all be fleeting, but they still stick with you. And this film, in my opinion, is able to reach out and touch you as an audience member enough times, particularly in the second half, that a bond is formed. And that cues you up for the sequel. And again, they have to stick that landing, but I'm ready to see the second act. And I think if I had to say the film had any weak points, I think there are two. One would be the director, but not with the actors. Andy Muschietti did a great job casting these actors and directing them. But I felt even with Chong Hoon-Chung's cinematography, it was a little flat visually. People have made comparisons to The Shining with this movie, and I think with the pacing and the mental aspects of it and the disturbing nature of it, that's there. But Muschietti simply doesn't have Stanley Kubrick's visual command or discipline. I also think that Georgie was a bit of a problem. I mean, he's absolutely adorable, but he never seemed quite real to me, especially when you consider how real the other kids are. But thankfully, Jaden Lieberher was still able to make me feel that loss through his performance. But still, an incredibly strong, haunting film that if the sequel delivers, I think will definitely stand the test of time. So what's your thoughts about It? This is the spoiler review, so go to town down below. I'm very excited to hear what everyone thinks about it. I know some people aren't going to like it because it's not what they expected, and so I'm very curious to have that conversation down below. And as always, you can check out some more videos right now.